Do transitions in your classroom have you at the end of your rope? Does it feel like you're trying to herd kittens when it comes to arrival, dismissal, or cleanup time? In today's episode, we'll be answering a listener's question.
Hi, my name is Linda. My question is, I'm a new teacher, and when it comes to transitions, I need some examples. I need to know exactly what we're doing because that's always been a problem for me. Thank you.
Great question, Linda. You're certainly not alone. Transitions are something that all early childhood educators deal with again and again, year after year. And here's the thing about transitions. Everybody tells you how important they are, but yet nobody gives you a roadmap or a recipe to improve those transitions.
Next step is to fold in the cheese.
What does that mean? What does fold in the cheese mean?
He folds it in.
I understand that, but how do you fold it? Do you fold it in half like a piece of paper and drop it in the pot, or what do you do?
David, I cannot show you everything.
So for Linda and anybody else out there who struggles with transitions, I've created a foolproof step-by-step process that lays it all out for you in easy to understand terms. So stick around until the very end so you don't miss a thing. First things first, we need to identify what needs to happen before we can achieve success with transitions. So think of these like the building blocks of successful transitions. Let's take cleanup time, for example. The first building block is to have realistic expectations of the young children in your classroom based on their developmental levels. So don't expect them to ever clean up perfectly because that's not a developmentally appropriate or realistic expectation for any 4-year-old or young child in general. The second building block is to have a predictable daily routine, and that includes a picture schedule. So a predictable routine is when the order of things that occur in your classroom are consistent from day to day. You see, young children have this innate need to feel safe. Not knowing what comes next in their day, it can make them feel very uncomfortable, unsafe, and that's when you're going to see transitions start to fall apart because they need to not only know what comes next in their day, but see pictures of it in the form of a picture schedule. Having a predictable daily routine will help your transitions flow much more smoothly. But it's important to note here that a picture schedule is not just a decoration on your wall. You have to use it every single time you transition, every single day. Your daily picture schedule is the very beginning stage of planning and time management for your students, which are two very critical executive function skills. Now, the third building block is all about using picture cues to help your students transition during the most difficult times of the day, like arrival, dismissal, and cleanup time. And so I've created a few, right? I have one for arrival and dismissal. It has step-by-step pictures with lots of options, so everyone is different in how their kids arrive or they dismiss their children. And then I have one that's specifically just for cleanup because that's how big of a challenge it is in any early childhood classroom. There's an entire product created for it. That brings me to the fourth and final building block, which is model, model, and model. And this one is so important, I named it 3 times in this step. You see, if we want our kids to do something, then we have to model it for them so they can see how it's done. Then they need to practice doing it on their own many, many, many times over weeks, months, or however long it takes, right? Because there is no set in stone time when they quote unquote should know it before we can actually expect them to do the thing we're asking correctly, right? So that brings me to the 4-step process that I promised you. Let's use cleanup time again as an example because, again, that's the most difficult one, right? So step number 1 in the cleanup transition process is how will they know when it's time to transition, right? How will they know when it's time to clean up? And all of the other pieces that come after that. So this is that step-by-step recipe we were talking about. What signal will you use to alert your students that it's time to clean up. Some teachers like to use sounds to signal transitions, things like a song or a bell or a timer, like a time timer. You choose the signal that works best for you in your classroom. But remember, that signal needs to match your expectation. So if you want your kids to all of a sudden start hurrying up really fast and getting really loud and not doing a great job because they're just throwing things everywhere because they're trying to beat the timer or the song or whatever, then you can do that. That's a choice that you have to make. But then you have to also expect the outcome, which would be more chaotic and more hectic. So in my opinion, we're trying to make cleanup time a calmer and much more smooth process so that it moves like a well-oiled machine. And in my opinion, that means that we're going to use, if we use a sound of some sort, it's going to be like a song that is not, or a melody that is not abrupt and in so fast that it's going to get their hearts racing and they're running around. We want to have something a little more calm, very distinctive though, to get their attention because, it's very loud during center time. So they have to be able to hear it. Things like that are what I prefer to use. It's also important to give them a warning that cleanup time is coming soon. So generally speaking, around the 5-minute mark, you can just let them know that cleanup time is coming soon. And you can do that in a number of different ways. You can hold up pictures of fingers, like 2 for 2 minutes or 4 for 4 minutes or 5 for 5 minutes, whatever it is. You want to let them know. I like the 5-minute one because that's quite a chunk of time so they can start thinking about it. When I show them the 5 fingers, then I would say, you have 5 minutes before cleanup time begins. Now is the time to start thinking about what you will put away, what you can put away now before it's too late. So I like to tell them what exactly they should be thinking in their head, right? Because some of them will think, well, this means I need to play harder really quickly. So you have to be very intentional about the way that you go about this whole 5-minute reminder type thing. Of course, there are those kids who struggle more than others. And for those kids that aren't doing well with transitions, let's say most of your class is, but you got like 3 or 4 who just, they just can't handle transitions, then you might want to do a personal reminder with them. And a personal reminder means going up to the child that you're thinking about who might have a problem, getting down on their level, looking them in the eye and saying their name. Let's pretend the child's name is David in this case. David, in 5 minutes, it's going to be time to clean up. So right now, I need you to start thinking about what you can put away so that you'll be ready when it's time. Right? And I get his acknowledgement. And then I ask him back, what's the one thing you can put away now so that you'll be ready? And I'll help him if he needs to. So if you have a few of those, do a few of those. I know all of us have large classes, little help, all those things. Hashtag all the things it means to be an early childhood teacher. But if you can, offer a personal reminder. That brings us to step 2. What should your kids do when it's time to transition? So you have your signal that you're going to use to announce your transition. But your kids will also need to know exactly what to do when it's time. And that to do part depends on those building blocks that I mentioned before. So they're going to need to know, and that means they've seen it modeled, they've modeled it themselves and practiced it themselves. They need to know exactly what they're going to do. And that means put the toys, I just call everything in the room a toy in order to just make this very succinct. Put the toys, because they were playing with them, right? So therefore we play with toys. Put the toys into the baskets or boxes or containers, whatever you call them, and put those things on the shelf, okay? That is the very simple way to look at this. So during the modeling process, remember our building blocks with modeling. During our modeling process, we will have pretended like there was a signal, right? We will have done that in our modeling lessons many, many times before we set the expectation that they're going to do it on their own. We will have modeled that. during that modeling process, we will have, after we play the signal, shown how we put the things that we were playing with back in the tubs. And so that modeling process looks like me sitting around with my whole class. I put one bin or basket or whatever you call them in the center. I will actually take a bunch of things out of that bin. So let's say we're talking about Duplo blocks or something. I'll put a few Duplo blocks on the floor scattered around this bin. And I'm going to pretend that I'm a kid. I'm one of them, right? They love this part. They're like all eyes on you when you do this. And so you're pretending to play with your Duplo blocks just for a few seconds, not very long. And then you pretend you hear the signal, or if you have a signal that something kids can hold, they can play the signal for you. That's always fun. And then you get up and you run away from the box and start screaming. And then you turn around and ask them, is that what I should do? And they go, no, what should I do? Oh, I think I have to put the things back in the box, right? I say, yes. So I go back, I sit down, I start all over. I put some blocks on the floor or whatever I was playing with, and I pretend to play for a couple of seconds. I hear the sound or pretend to hear the sound, and I start putting the toys into the tub or basket. And then I stand up and run away and scream again. And they're like, no. And I'm like, what did I do wrong? I put the toys in the basket. And they go, no, you didn't put the basket on the shelf. I'm like, okay, let's do it again. And so I do it again. And again, we follow that same pattern. This time, I put the toys into the tub and I put the tub on the shelf. And then I run away screaming. Okay, now we have to go back and we have to say, no, you put the toys away and put the tub on the shelf, but you ran away screaming. That's not how we clean up. What should I do after I put the toys in the basket and put it back on the shelf? You should walk over to the carpet or wherever it is that you're telling them to go. And I'm like, okay, let me try one more time. I think I can do it. And they're like, you can do it, Mrs. Levin. And so I do it again. And that is so fun for them, but so powerful. And I say, okay, I get it now. Do you get it? And they'll be like, yeah. And I'm like, well, can you show me? And so then we'll practice. I'll get 2 or 3 kids to play with that tub of Duplos for a few minutes. And then I'll play the sound or signal. And then they do the thing that they're supposed to do. And usually by this point, most of the kids get it right. And we're, oh, that's great. You got it so much more quickly than I did. And we just do that a few times until all the different groups in the class have had a turn. So if you have a large class, get 4 kids at a time. If you have a smaller class, do 2 or 3, whatever works for you. But that is the most effective way to get them to understand this is what cleaning up is. And also, we can't forget that doesn't just happen one day, right? That's going to happen multiple days. We're going to be practicing this multiple days. Now, do I get down on the floor and do all that stuff every single day? No. I'll say, remember yesterday when I did XYZ? I wonder if you could show me again, because I think I'm starting to forget already what we talked about. And I'll say, can you show us again how to clean up? And I'll pick a few kids and we'll go through it just a couple times. Same thing the next day. Oh, do you remember how to clean up? You know, it maybe just take a few days depending on the kids you're working with, or it could take weeks or months. It just really depends on how much experience your kids have with cleaning up before they get to you. This is where those visual picture cues come into play. So you can use the ones I created that you're going to be using to remind your kids of the cleanup process throughout the year, or you can create your own. I also have a set of center task cards. When they get to the end, it's always clean up. And so there's a cleanup reminder on every single one of these cards that you put at each center. So another really helpful thing that you can have in place in your classroom to help with cleanup time are labels. So remember how we talked about taking those baskets, bins, or containers out and putting them on the floor and then modeling. One of the things I like to do during that time is to make sure that every single tub or container in my classroom has a picture label, right? And so, of course, it has the word underneath it too for environmental print. But they can look at the end of that tub and they can look for on the shelf, they can look for that same picture. So they're practicing matching skills. And they put the tub onto where the picture is on the shelf. So I actually attach the picture to the end of the tub. Actually, I'm tricky and I do it on both ends so that they always are facing out on the shelf, and then attach one to your actual shelf. People ask me, how do you do that? Many, many different ways. You can use clear contact paper. You can use packing tape. You can have little label holders on the ends of the tubs. Many different ways to do it. I've used them all over the years. I like the little pockets on the ends of the tubs. Those seem to work best for me because we do like to change out things in centers quite often. So when your kids know where the items belong, in which tub and on which shelf, it's going to make them less frustrated and facilitate a smoother cleanup time for everybody. So that brings me to step 3 in our process, and that is, where do they go when they're done? So this is where I think a lot of people take a misstep. So you're going to want to listen up here, because we talked about how we set them up for success, and we talked about modeling and practice. And so we actually already got them to clean up, but the transition itself isn't over. The objective of cleaning up is, but they haven't started the transitioning piece yet. So this is where things get tricky. You need to be very, very clear about exactly where they should go when they're done and what they're going to do when they get there. You're also going to need to practice and model this particular piece of the transition as well. Because if you don't, your kids will make their own decisions again. Quite often that looks like sliding into first base, wrestling on the floor, all of these things, which can lead to traffic control problems and even injury. Now, step 4 is just as important as all the other parts, because you don't want to get to this point in your transition and have everything fall apart, right? So it's, what do they do when they get there? So for example, if you're asking your kids to clean up and go to the carpet or meeting area, you must have instructions for what they do when they get there. Because if there is nothing for them to do, you will lose them. Some of them will go back to playing. They're like, she wanted me to clean up, but there's nothing going on, so I'm just going to bounce. They have to have something to do, right? So think about what that could be. Many cases that I've used in the past have been to look at a book, right? So they come to the circle time area and they look at a book. If you have an assistant, then there is an assistant there on the carpet that is doing finger plays with them or reading a story, or vice versa. She could be out in the centers and I could be doing that piece. But at some point, somebody is doing something there if you have enough warm adult bodies in the classroom to help you out. But there has to be something for them to do. And the reason having something for them to do is super important is because if you keep them waiting too long for the stragglers, right? There's always going to be a straggler. It doesn't matter how long you give them. You could give them 3 hours to clean up. There's always going to be a straggler, right? So you have to give them something to do because you don't want them to wait too long. What do we know about young children and their attention spans? They're very, very, very short, and their ability to wait is the same, very short times that they can wait before they just give up, right? And they start acting out. So we have to be very specific and very careful in this last piece and not keep them waiting too long. And this is where a lot of teachers end up feeling frustrated because their kids are waiting too long for those few stragglers, right? So you have to have plans in place to help with those few stragglers. So it might just be that they're not there yet and you have to accept their ability level as far as cleaning up as long as they're making an attempt. Everyone's different. Oh, and there's also one thing that I've heard from many teachers before who struggle with transitions. And that thing that they tell me over and over again is, I've told my kids 1,000 times, but they just won't listen. Here's the thing. Telling isn't teaching. Just because you may have said it 1,000 times doesn't mean that your kids understand what it means, what it looks like, and how to make it happen. Here are some troubleshooting tips for those of you who continue to struggle with transitions. The first thing I want you to do is to ask yourself, do I have too many transitions in my day, right? Because young children can only handle so many transitions in a day before they become overwhelmed, right? And once they become overwhelmed by the constant change, well, then everything's going to fall apart, right? So we want to reduce the number of transitions if you have too many. The general rule of thumb when it comes to transitions is no more than 5 in one school day, if possible. Another troubleshooting tip is to really ask yourself, do my transitions take too long? Because I've mentored many, many teachers over the years, and quite often it comes down to the fact that their kids are waiting too long. So that might mean you need to adjust your expectations for those stragglers, right? Maybe those stragglers aren't going to be as cleanup perfect as all their peers. Maybe they need more time and practice getting it quote unquote right. And we can't lose 90% of the class for the 10% who are still struggling. So we're going to have to look at what they're doing, what the strugglers or stragglers rather are doing, and how we can help support them, and also adjust our expectations for them around cleanup, maybe a cleanup buddy or something like that, because we can't keep our kids, other kids waiting, right? The general rule of thumb with waiting time when it comes to after cleanup is short and sweet. Keep it as short and sweet as possible. So there you have it, my step-by-step process for improving transitions in your classroom. Until next time, I'm Vanessa Levin. Onward and upward. If you think these videos are valuable, you have got to come check out the Teaching Trailblazers program. Teaching Trailblazers is the place for teachers like you to get the professional development resources and support you need to thrive. It's where you can learn relevant, life-changing best practices with professional development created specifically around the challenges early childhood teachers face. It's where you can get access to a complete research-based pre-K curriculum that you can use either to supplement your existing curriculum or use on its own to get 100% of your students kindergarten ready by the end of the year. And it's where you can hang out and connect over all things early childhood with other teachers just like you and me. It's my favorite place on earth, and it will change your teacher life, I guarantee it. Come join us at teachingtrailblazers.com to get more information and apply today. That's teachingtrailblazers.com. I can't wait to see you there.